Greetings shippers, welcome back, and we're going to take another look at the Umbrella Academy. There's a lot to unpack here, and some of it goes beyond shipping and into the realm of fandom conceptions themselves. Before we get started, if you haven't already, please do follow on social media to stay up to date, know when we're streaming, and just come on over and chit chat about fandom. It's a good time, I swear. Last time we talked about the Umbrella Academy, we talked about the fandom in general, specifically the shipping that's going on inside of it, which meant that we covered the topic of pseudo-incest. So if you missed that, please check it out. You can click the card or the link will be down below. We're not going to go over everything there, but some of it is going to be pertinent for what we're about to discuss. Also, for those who are upset that I didn't mention their OTP, I'll say it right now. 5 Ex Dolores. You're welcome. So today we're going to take a bit of a bigger look at Luther and Allison. In our last video we just briefly touched upon it, but Luther and Allison have become a bit of a touchstone for a lot of the issues in fandom and the discourse surrounding it. So let's take a bit of a closer look at this pairing and the various reasons why some people are for it and some people are not for it at all. Because as mentioned, the rationales extend for some beyond the pairing itself. So let us briefly touch upon why some people are shipping it. This will be a shorter section because this is a pairing that is less shipped than others, and is one of the least popular ships within the fandom at the time of this recording. Sometimes when discussing these pairings, there is one side that ends up getting more discussion, which is not to say that a ship is either good or bad, but simply that there is more to unpack in one area. One last thing before we really get into it is that it must be reiterated, this is not a bashing space. On this channel, we take a look at a variety of ships from all kinds of different angles. Of course, we don't all have to agree, but we can express our opinions respectfully. Different strokes for different folks, and fandom can be Fandom, but we do have to work to keep it that way. And in fact, that very sentiment is part of what is being worked through with this pairing. The Umbrella Academy as a source text, both as a TV series and the comic from which it is adapted, is working through this pairing. Allison and Luther were raised together, however it is implied by the text that while some of the other kids at the Academy grew up feeling that they were siblings, that was never the case with Allison and Luther, who developed a very different type of relationship. A crush on each other that had been going on since they were children. In short, in this series' own internal canon, these two did not perceive each other as siblings. However, because of the outside perceptions of the other children at the Academy as well as the world, they still referred to each other as such. Hence, they will talk to each other and use terms such as bro and sis, or how Allison's daughter Claire will refer to Luther as uncle. This, of course, understandably led many to be very squicky or uncomfortable with this pairing, as they felt that it was pseudo-incest or full incest, as some people do not like to draw the distinction. For they feel that to draw such a distinction is to place a hierarchy on biological versus adoptive siblings, one that they feel should not be there. So of course, for those who wanted to work through this pairing, they felt that this couple had chemistry and that it was an intriguing and different angle to take, and that the source material itself is providing its own logic for the reader or watcher to jump upon. Also drawing upon the fact that in fandom it is possible to get into the character's headspace and to work through their rationale and present a reasoning that makes what they are going through make sense. Also, these shippers are more likely to adhere to the mindset that there is fiction and then there is reality, and that the two are separate. And that while there can be an impact or an influence, it is nowhere near as large as many people seem to think. They also will draw upon the fact that there are multiple fandoms and many different takes on different types of relationships. As a result, they feel that just because this one fandom may be working through a taboo or controversial subject, that is not the case for all of them, and that not every fandom needs to be the same, and that it's all right if certain fandoms are more controversial than others, because there are always tons of other fandoms to check out if that is not to one's taste. They will also point out that it is possible to create the material that one wants to see. So if one prefers the non-sibling pairings or genfic, gen being general fiction, which does not necessarily mean that it is rated G, but simply that it is not pairing focused, then they can create the work they want to see. Instead of spending time tearing down or complaining about the pseudo-incest pairings, they could be creating their own works. However, for those who are not into Luther and Allison, many will express the sentiment that it's not even all about the pseudo-incest. There is more going on. So let's take a look at that. Since the Netflix adaptation of the series, many fans have found that their affinities have been drawn to certain characters. Certain members of the Hargreaves family have managed to accrue more sympathy than others. At the top of the sympathy poll is of course Klaus, who has become the fandom favorite, followed fairly closely by Five. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, at the bottom of the totem pole of sympathy, we have Luther, followed quite closely by Allison. Some would go so far as to say that these two are the least popular characters in the series, and the fact that they are paired together canonically seems to be fitting for certain fans, as they feel that they deserve each other. Although there are some who very much do not enjoy Luther as a character and feel that Allison could do better and that Luther just needs to stay away from her. There are some feelings about Luther. There's also more to him that's not worked through in fandom because of those feelings, but that's a discussion for another video. So some feel the lack of Luther and Allison, and indeed the pushback against it, partially comes from the fact that people do not approve of these characters' actions within the series, and hence do not want to be working through fics where they find each other happy, or in any kind of positive light, as some feel that these are quasi-villainous characters. Some feel that this is playing into the other squick factors and can be added on top of them. This has also come into play because some will note that there can be fans who are against Luther and Allison, but will be pro other pairings between the siblings, such as Diego and Klaus, or 5 Diego Klaus Ben, or there's a bunch of pairings that are going on. There's a lot happening in this fandom. Some argue that this is because Allison and Luther is a het pairing, and that when it comes to incest or pseudo-incest pairings in fandom, on top of the general squig that this seems to cause for many, there is also the fact that when it is a heterosexual pairing, it draws more upon the societal taboos that are in place across many societies in the world. Namely that these types of incest pairings are worse than their queer counterparts because of the hypothetical potential of children. Now some would argue that because Luther and Allison are not biological siblings, this should not apply. However, for many, is the environment in which they feel that these characters were raised that create the sibling relationship, and so they still feel the same level of discomfort. And some feel that subconsciously they may be applying this same bias to the pairing, despite the lack of biological ties. Whereas such logic is not applied to a Diego and Klaus pairing, as offspring are not technically possible. Unless, of course, you're writing an MPreg story, then all bets are off. For certain fans, they don't really have a horse in this race, or they are not big shippers and they are just observing what is happening from an outside standpoint. From there have been some interesting observations made, namely about the fact that some are using the fact that they do not ship Luther and Allison as a kind of litmus test for being better fans. Some will go so far as to say that that makes them better people. This, of course, can send some into a spiral of discussing activism online or using fandom as activism, and whether indeed that is true activism or not, as some feel that it is and makes a huge impact, and others feel that it is not, and that certain fans' vehemence towards these ideas are making fandom into a less inclusive space, including for the very people that they claim to be trying to protect. Others note that conceptually, certain fans have a type of ship that they believe they will never ship, be it incest, RPF, dark, abuser and victim, any kind of ship like that. However, many will note that shipping is something that tends to occur to many fans, not something that they seek out, but something that they find themselves drawn to, and that there are many fans who believe that they would never have shipped a certain type of pairing, however all of a sudden it comes upon them, as a surprise. As a result, some feel that it's best not to be too judgy, as you never know when it could happen to you. One could just be strolling along through fandom and suddenly find themselves smack in the face with a taboo, controversial dark ship, and that kind of thing is okay, as it is not a reflection upon the individual, especially as these days many fans are in multiple fandoms, so it is entirely possible to have a very dark pairing in one fandom and an entirely healthy positive pairing in another, for people are nuanced and complex, and the rationales that draw them to things are not so black and white. And indeed, some feel that the smugness just needs to be taken out of fandom, that it is hindering the creativity that is possible in the space, and that really if people were left alone to create what they wanted to create, people would see that there's actually not as much taboo content in most places as people seem to think. However, on the flip side, there are those who feel that all hobbies need to be policed more intensely, and that all behavior should constantly be monitored as a reflection on the person's being, especially in a day and age when so much activity takes place online. Indeed, there are many who spend more time online than outside the digital space, and as a result, some feel that must necessarily correlate to making online spaces have more clear and direct values that reflect the society of the world. However, of course, that brings in other discussions of which society will be the one that is drawn in, for there are different values across the world. Some fear that because so much fandom content happens in North America, that would be the dominant mindset that is placed upon fandom, and not everybody would be comfortable with that, fearing a sort of cultural imperialism and a lack of understanding for different laws and viewpoints from around the world. As one can see, Luther and Allison can actually speak to a lot of different things that are happening within fandom, which is part of what makes it so fascinating. The pairing itself is much less intriguing than the discussions that can come from it. Fandom has always been an intriguing space working through a lot of issues. Others have concerns that by stamping out certain pairings, it removes one of the core tenets from fandom, and that is the idea that characters and relationships can be interpreted the way that the fan wants. That fandom is a space where canon can be completely unmade, or a space where it can just be expanded upon. And they feel that it is unfair for this pairing to be singled out as one that is simply not allowed, when there are other pairings that people have to do a lot more with in terms of twisting and gymnastics to make work, basically raising the question of why are certain ships allowed to be manipulated and explored, but not others. There are certain fandoms that will completely embrace their taboo ships and others that will not. This is where many adopt the attitude of ship and let's ship. The idea that if something is not for you, block the tag, exclude the pairing, or find some other way to not see the material you don't want to see, and as mentioned, create the material that one does. And of course, some reiterate the sentiment that there are other fandoms for one to enjoy. But of course, the counter to that is that certain fans want to stay in this fandom, and they want to be able to enjoy it the way that they want. It must be noted that this is some people's first encounter with any kind of very taboo subject matter when it comes to fandom. And some will note the youth of some of these fans, claiming that when one is younger, they are a bit more rigid in their way of thinking, especially if they haven't encountered a lot of challenges to that thought process. Of course, this varies. There are some who will never be comfortable with this concept no matter how old they get. However, in this fandom, it must be noted that there are certainly some Luther and Allison shippers who are sitting quietly in the corner, not wanting to rock the boat and not wanting to put themselves out there for fear of being attacked. And of course, there are others who don't ship it for none of the reasons we've discussed, and just feel that based upon the characters' presented personality types, they'd be a bad couple. This is also why there appears to be a bit of a return to isolated fandom spaces such as Discord, where people can come and talk about specifically the pairings that they want without fear of antis. Another topic that this brings up for some is they feel that Tumblr has become a bit more of a toxic place than it ever was since the Purge. That those who remain on Tumblr are some of the most vehement. Of course, the drop in Tumblr traffic is a topic for another day. When it comes to the Umbrella Academy, it is still a burgeoning fandom, and people are creating all types of works. Allison and Luther is definitely in the minority. It is an intriguing discussion. So I of course have to ask you, how do you feel about Allison and Luther? Is it a pairing you ship? Why or why not? If you don't ship Allison and Luther, do you have another pseudo-incest pairing? If so, why? How inclusive do you feel that fandom should be to taboo topics? Let me know all of your feelings down below. You know the drill, numbered if possible, because I love a good essay comment. And of course, one last time, this is not a bashing space. We can all have these discussions respectfully, and indeed, people learn the most that way. The comments on the last video were a very interesting place. People had some very interesting conversations. This is a no judgment zone. Ship and let's ship, for this is Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy. We will explore all the ships in all of the parallel worlds, the ships across the multiverse. If you haven't already, please do subscribe and hit that bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to get a little controversial with me. I always appreciate it. There are, as always, more videos coming soon, so I will see you when I can, and until then, let's get to the outro. Bye-bye. This has been Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Special thanks to all of my patrons, names on the side, for helping to make these videos possible. There are, as always, more videos coming soon, so until then, stay tuned, for there are as many ships out there as there are stars in the sky.